So on a perhaps more controversial topic, I just want to say that for any of this Marcus Lewis fans, fair enough. If you read the book The Big Short, it's really good, but the film is just utter nonsense. So the reality is that there's many claims in the film that just aren't true. So but the thing is that so basically, like I always loved that film, and it's a good film for kind of um you know making those points to like a wide audience, but a lot of it is actually kind of nonsense. So I mean, the worst claim in the film is they knew and didn't care, and it's like, all right, okay, fine. Like, so you can go back to the law case with Morgan Stanley, and by the end of it, they knew, and what they did is they sold options to their clients. They sold sorry, credit default swaps to their clients while also betting against them. Well, no, sorry, they sold mortgage bonds. I'm messing up right now, but they sold collateralized debt obligations and mortgage bonds their clients were also buying credit default swaps. But that was by the end. There's no way the banks on purposely decided to sink themselves. There's no way they caused the situation on purpose. It was obviously a mistake. And I think also as well, like the guys are talking about a very kind of small time, and they made like pretty decent amount of money from it for themselves. But there were plenty of people that made a lot more money out of the financial crisis than they did. And yeah, and like it doesn't really go into enough detail about the whole history behind it. I mean, you can link things back all the way to the goldsmiths in the 1600s, and I do talk about that a lot. But essentially, how like money became something which wasn't the whole start of banking is essentially the idea they sold more receipts they took in gold. So from the fact that they always kind of created an unstable system. But even you read Mervyn King, it's definitely someone I'd say to read, you see how much like the growth in mortgage bonds was due to the growth in the Chinese economy, and the fact they were trying to constantly supply the Chinese economy and like other developing nations with bonds that they could buy. And especially like why the crisis spread around the world. You didn't talk about the money markets. Like there's a lot of like details that are missing, and that's fine. But what I don't like is actually some of the claims in the film aren't true. And like they use certain types of analogies and they use actors that clearly don't understand things, and that's fair enough, but they're just not correct. I mean, like when you see the situation with like they're betting on the pontoon hand, and it's all like a big crowd, and like that's a good way of explaining how the kind of there were massive amounts of money that all went onto like one thing, but it doesn't really quite explain it properly because it's not the one thing, it's the fact there was so many things, and the fact that there was so much money being like put into the US economy from the growth in the Chinese economy. It's things like that are just very, very important. And like I can understand the lack of detail, but it almost tries to claim like, oh, these were the only guys that saw it coming, which is like not true. Okay, many people saw it coming, and especially a lot of people within investment banking saw what was going on and they profited from it. But of course, people within Lehman Brothers, for example, they didn't know what was going on until it was too late, and that's why it collapsed. Yeah, I just think that Michael Lewis is a very, very, and I think that the book is far better than the film. Michael Lewis is a very good journalist, but at the end of the day, he was a failed trader. And at the end of his film, it's quite interesting. He talks to his CEO again. He says like his CEO wasn't interested in talking to him because in their day, used to say things like a man's word is bond. And it's like, well, very clearly a man's word is not your bond, okay? And that's exactly, in fact, that's where a tradable loan comes from. It comes from that phrase, and that's very much why English banking or British banking sort of took over, because people could trust. In those days, you needed trust. And like these days, you still do need trust. Okay, but I think with him, he has a very cynical view of the finance industry, and I think he does his best to act like the small guy wins. And then he wrote a whole book about Sam Bankman-Fried, and I'm not even that interested in reading it because, like, why do I want to learn about the worst side of things? I mean, you almost get into like Wolf of Wall Street territory, which I think is an absolutely terrible film. And like, all I'm trying to say is that the best way to learn about things is not to read the cowboys, not to read the failed traders, not to read the cynical people. That's not going to get you far. It's not going to make you any money. And there's certain things you can learn from that book, and I still think it's worth reading that book. I mean, if you want to watch the film, if you don't really have a very good understanding of financial markets and economics, you don't really know much about it, then maybe watch that film, but you still learn some lessons which aren't actually true. But I think essentially having a positive attitude, I think with anything in life, is the right attitude. And a negative attitude, I think, is something that's best avoided. And I think ultimately Michael Lewis still displays quite a negative attitude. And I don't think you're not going to make any money with that attitude. And with burning bridges and a negative attitude, you're not going to make a lot of money. And that's not the way to go. That's my final point on this.